You want your child to be active. You want them to do things that they enjoy. And you know that they have some talent and some ability in the game of baseball. And so you're trying to support them, but you also want to be careful about pushing them too hard, because you see kids out there with ability, but the stresses of the game and of life end up mounting up and ruining the experience for them. So coming full circle, all you really want is for your child to be happy. And we're going to take a deep dive here over the next few episodes on the mental side of youth baseball. And this first episode is the first of a 3-part series of specifically dealing with the stress of baseball. And we all know that this is a big deal, but how big of a deal is it? Well, I did some research on some studies, and an NIH study of 216 to 17-year-old athletes reported that 58% suffer from moderate to extreme stress. And of those, many claimed that they wanted professional help to deal with sports stress. Stanford, the CDC, and others also report that anywhere from 5 to 16% of teens are prescribed medications for mental health. And in addition to that, a great number of other students and student athletes reported self-medicating, with over 60% of teens who use pain pills and or other sedatives reporting that they do so to relieve stress. And the original NIH study also cited that athletes are at higher levels of stress than non-student athletes. So what am I getting at with all this? Well, it's not a surprise to you, but we have stressed out kids and we have stressed out athletes, and these athletes are building to, or they're already at a boiling point of stress in their lives. So this is an issue that parents and coaches need to be educated on. We need to confront, we have to consider what's happening, and we have to be intentional about addressing it. So over these 3 episodes, the first episode might kind of surprise you, but it's actually reflecting on, is crying okay in baseball? And we'll get to the point of why that's an important question to ask. The second episode will deal with burnout, and is burnout a myth? And we'll talk about that. I think that you might be surprised at my take on that one. And then the third episode will be on stress versus nerves, an important distinction that we'll get into. And so this first episode struck me because we just finished the World Series and all that, and looking at the Phillies game a while ago, you'll remember that the Phillies pitcher Orion Kirkering had to play on the comebacker to him, where he just got kind of flustered in that moment, overthrew the catcher, and made a mistake that we've seen time and time again. The thing that was surprising about this, obviously, is that it came from a major leaguer. And a few moments after that, like, he could be seen pretty emotional, understandably, but pretty emotional and actually crying. So that made me reflect on, major leaguer crying and how that's kind of unique to see. And it also reminded me of, like, the old Tom Hanks, from League of Their Own quote, "There's no crying in baseball," and where he's talking to, the girl, and he's like, what are you crying? And so that's kind of the way that's the baseball that I grew up in, that, you're not going to cry. If you cry, like, that's just soft and you're weak and it's unacceptable. So in 2025, though, have things changed, and should they have changed, or should that still be kind of the take that we have? So I think that to think through this, though, there's a few reasons why people cry, and a few contributing factors. So let's dig into that a little bit. Underlying all of it, though, is that crying's an emotional outpouring. And there's 4 reasons then that people cry that we tend to see. The first one is happiness. And I think that's the kind of the least important for us to look at in terms of youth baseball, because this is pretty rare. And if your kid's crying out of happiness, then something probably pretty dramatic happened, and you're probably crying too. And it's probably not something that we need to really break down and reflect on too much. Like, it's pretty rare. We probably don't need to examine that. So the second reason, though, maybe something that we need to take a little bit of a look at, is finality. And oftentimes when we see an athlete cry due to finality, it's because it's the end of an era. Perhaps it's the last time they're going to play. Perhaps it's the last time that team will be together. Maybe they lost championship. Maybe their career's ending. And I think that those are pretty powerful moments. And certainly there's a level of emotion that's totally acceptable and appropriate for those times. Again, we want to be to be careful that that we're still able to regulate our emotions, and it's about emotional stability and being grounded, which we'll get into. But for the most part, I think the finality and crying due to finality is pretty acceptable. Those things are pretty rare. They're pretty overwhelming, and I get that. And I don't think that's something that we need to be too concerned about as parents or coaches. The third reason, and we see this a lot in youth sports especially, is pain, physical pain. And when it comes to physical pain, I think it's important to understand, like, the kids are going to get over it. I think that we as coaches and parents should challenge kids to get tougher, because physical toughness will carry over to emotional toughness. And it's on us as coaches and parents to help kids learn to transition from pain, physical when they're young, and then mental and emotional pain when they get older. And so learning to deal and to cope with physical pain is one of the early ways that we can help athletes and young people to self-regulate and to be have some control over their emotions. So again, the key there, regulating one's emotions. I think that crying due to pain is an important opportunity to start an athlete on that path of regulating one's emotions. So I think that as parents and coaches, we don't need to yell at the kid. We don't need to belittle them ever. But I think challenging them, letting them understand, like, hey, you're going to be okay. That's the early stage of putting that pain into context, which we'll get back to later on. So I think that's a good way to challenge young people. I think that unless it's a dramatic injury, challenge them to get up quickly, to recover quickly, because it's important that they start understanding that connection between quickly recovering from disappointment, recovering from something that hurts, again, in this case, pain, physical pain, later on emotional and more mental pain that they'll suffer through. And then the fourth reason why people tend to cry, and this is one that we're really going to focus on, is frustration. And what really underlies crying from frustration? Well, the root of it is a lack of self-control. And it's understandable why people might cry from frustration. That's usually failing. Usually what we see is that somebody's failing, and that's why they're crying there. It can be extremely stressful, the failure that they're experiencing, but it is a lack of self-control. And it's usually also paired with not understanding, like, some priorities being out of whack. Maybe I think the most common one is that they're result focused. They're not focused on the process. And so the overwhelming failure of that result, the disappointment of that result, is getting to them, and then, they lose self-control and crying. It can also be poor priorities. They are making that game, that moment, bigger than it really needs to be. And they've lost some context, which points to, bigger life questions, which may be at an age of 13 or 12, they're not quite there to kind of, think through those bigger life issues. But, poor priorities is certainly something to consider there too. So is crying acceptable? Well, that might be the wrong question to ask, I think. I'm not sure that's the right question. But if I had to answer it simply, I would say no, that crying's not acceptable due to frustration. But again, it's important to point out why it's unacceptable. And when we are working with that athlete, it's important to let them know that's unacceptable because of what that crying indicates. It oftentimes points to selfishness. So if they're crying off selfishness because, just an example, the team's up by 7 runs and you strike out and you start crying, that's extremely selfish. The team's doing well. You failed, but the team's still first and foremost, and that's selfishness. So it's important to let them know the crying's unacceptable because it's making it clear to everybody that you're being selfish. So it's not that we're upset about the crying, it's that we're trying to address the selfishness. That's the issue. And so when those things happen, I think it's important for the coach, the parent, to consider what's this crying really indicating, and then point to that specifically with that athlete or with that child, so that they understand that it's not the crying that's the problem. It's what's going on in their mind, in their heart, that's a reflection of selfishness, or that's reflecting priorities that might not be healthy or things like that. So I think that's really what we're getting at when we're working with these kids. And so to kind of summarize things here, we're all looking for passion from our kids and from our athletes. We want them to be excited. We want them to go and get it, get after it out there. We want them to play sports hard and to love it and to invest a lot. But there also needs to be emotional stability. And that's the same thing with life. We don't want, like numb kids. We don't want numb students. We want people that are invested in what they're doing, but that also have the ability to regulate their emotions. And I think that priorities is an important place to start with when we're mentoring these kids. Let them know, like, what are your priorities? Help them to identify that. And if your priority is batting 400 or scoring 20 points or whatever, then those priorities are misplaced. And that's definitely a results-oriented mindset, and they need to get back to a process-oriented mindset. Process-oriented mindsets are powerful because they help to relieve stress, because the athlete is focused more on things that they can control, and that they're much easier for them to be able to be consistent with, rather than a scoreboard type of result. And I think that's important to teach them what a grounded mindset looks like in those moments. And I have a definition here of how I would define a grounded mindset. And the definition that I came up with is, it's an understanding of the truth of the context of the given situation. And I'll say that once again. A grounded mindset is understanding the truth of the context of the given situation. A lot of times when these moments occur that make these athletes stressed out or really hyper emotional, it's because there's something that the truth is not present in their minds. They're saying something, their internal their self-talk is off. They're thinking things like, my parents won't love me if I get out, or I'm going to let everybody down. Everybody's going to be upset with me. I'm no good at this. My career's over with. I'm a failure. Any of those things are false. They're lies. And so they're lacking truth. And then the second part of that is an understanding of the truth of the context of the given situation. Oftentimes these athletes and young people are taking these situations completely out of context. They go to a showcase where they're feeling super stressed out. The context of that is that you're trying to get an opportunity to show people what you can do and to enjoy the moment, to kind of showcase all your work that you put into it. It shouldn't be something, it's like having a job interview. It shouldn't be something that makes you stressed or upset. It's an opportunity to go out there and, like Pete Carroll says, just let it rip. You put in all the work and the time and the thought and the effort, and now you get to go out there and share that with people. And that should be something that's exciting and fun. That's the context of it. Context is that's an opportunity. It's not going to, it's not fatalistic. It's not going to ruin your life. It's not going to, in very rare circumstances, will it determine, whether you can play at the next level or anything like that. So it's really understanding the truth of what they're saying to themselves and the context of that situation. And so it's also understanding that failure is a loss, and a loss is acceptable. Failing's acceptable, and that the result here is not greater than the process. It's not greater than the athlete's character, and that comes back to their priorities. That's why it's important to help these young people to reflect on what their priorities are and why they're doing these things and what are the most important things in their life. That means that one's faith, their relationships, understanding their own character, those should be the things that we really promote to our athletes and promote to our kids and to the people that we're working with, so that they put more stock into those things than into a batting average, into an Instagram account or video that they're able to post, or committed poster or something like that they're able to put up on their social media. It comes back to understanding their priorities, being grounded, having that grounded mindset, understanding the truth of the context of the given situations that they're put in athletics. And so when we as parents and coaches encounter these situations where an athlete is really hyper emotional and they're crying about something, these are powerful moments, because when they are in those moments and they're super charged up emotionally, you have such a captive audience to be able to share with them, and to be able to have a conversation that they will probably remember for a long time, and pointing them back to, what is at the foundation of why we're doing this. What's at the foundation for your life, your faith, your relationships with people, your character, whatever is important to those athletes. Help them to understand that, and to reflect on the things that actually matter. Maybe it's not even important to those athletes. So that's where an adult needs to walk alongside them, help them to understand the things that are actually of lasting importance, and that this game is not, it's not eternal, it's not everlasting. So again, pointing back to those moments, try not to get frustrated. I know that sometimes we feel embarrassed that our athlete or our child is crying, and again, it does mean that it's acceptable, but it means that the adult needs to calmly understand what is this crying, which one of those 4 categories does it fall under, and how can we point the athlete back to having a grounded mindset, recognizing why they're crying, and pointing them back to, let's keep things in context, let's focus on your self-talk and what really is the truth of this situation, and keep this failure in context. So these opportunities, they're powerful. I think that they're things that we should really treasure as coaches and parents, because it's the opportunity to plant that seed of grounded mindset. So with that, I hope that there's something there that will help you guys to navigate this stressful world of youth sports. And check back for episode 2. In episode 2, we're going to hit a little bit of a hot topic with burnout, and answering the question is burnout a myth, or is it kind of overcooked? Is it a misunderstood term? So we'll talk about that next. And then episode 3, we'll wrap up with stress versus nerves, and talk about the distinction there, and take a deeper dive into those 2 topics. So thank you guys for joining.